Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is going to be the normal weekend review show, April 5th through the 7th, 2019. We're going to talk about Shazam. We're going to talk about Pet Sematary. We're going to talk a little bit about The Best of Enemies, the new wide release openers. We'll walk through the rest of the top 10, see how Dumbo did on its second weekend. See what's going on outside the top 10, some smaller movies that have been released, art films, and then we'll check out what's happening over the next few weeks at the box office. So let's dive right into the top 10. Coming in at number 1 was Shazam. The DCEU movie from Warner Brothers and New Line made $53.4 million this weekend, its opening weekend at the box office. Super saturated release, 4,200 theaters. Per theater average here on the opening weekend was about $12,700. Total gross so far is actually a little bit above this because Shazam had that special preview weekend. Was it last weekend or 2 weekends ago? I can't remember. So right now Shazam sits at $56.7 million overall. Worldwide, we can check that out real quick. It's at 158 as its global box office right now, which is pretty darn good. So is this good? Is this bad? How do we judge this? I think right off the bat, it's good. Tracking for this was 45 to 50. It has a much lower production budget than a normal comic book movie. So its production budget is only at $100 million. Now, compared to other movies, like a Blumhouse movie, that's a lot. But for a comic book movie, $100 million is pretty good. So it exceeded expectations a little bit. And there was some... going into this weekend I was very clueless about this movie, and I talked about that last weekend. I had no clue what this was going to do. I was expecting 45 to 55, and I was right about that, but that was honestly just a total guess because I had no idea which way this was going to go. There was really great social media buzz. Deadline brought this up in their write-up. Relish Mix reports that the viral rate of the 4 trailers for Shazam was 129 to 1, which is much better than 37 to 1. Which is the normal ratio there. It's like their viral rating. So the short of that is social media was really popping off the last couple of weeks on Shazam. And I think a lot of that had to do with the quality of the film. If you look at the ratings right now, let's walk through our normal little breakdown of the quality here. Critics gave it a 91% on Rotten Tomatoes. 91%. A 7.3 out of 10 rating. So this is where Rotten Tomatoes gets kind of weird. It has a 91% Rotten Tomatoes, which is just an outstanding rating on that service. But the real rating from critics is 7.3 out of 10. So you already have this huge discrepancy of almost 20 points, 20 percentage points. So 91% of critics thought that, hey, this was a good movie. Their actual score, if they had to put a number on what they felt about it, 73% out of 100. So just something to keep in mind. Does that really matter? No. It's not a huge deal, but it's something to point out about Rotten Tomatoes because, like, now if you compared Shazam to like an art house film that got like an 89%, and you might say, oh, well, Shazam's a better film. Maybe not, right? It's not necessarily 1-to-1 in terms of those Rotten Tomatoes critic score ratings. Audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, we could do a grain of salt, of course, 90%. But that is backed up by the cinema score of an A. Which is very good for this movie. The overall story on Shazam is that this is the best DCEU movie that's been made. That's what I've heard from people. That's just the general vibe that I'm getting. If we look at Letterboxd, which I really am enjoying looking at this now because, and we'll see here with these ratings why, it's one of the reasons why I really like using these numbers, because they're from film fans and kind of film nerds, maybe some film snobs. So there's like a very specific, there's almost this like honesty to them that you don't necessarily get from a cinema score, which is just fans going opening night to see it. So it's always skewed higher. And then critics, they get paid to write this stuff. There's a lot of baggage with being a critic and sort of expectations. Critics tend to like hate horror films and they don't like comedies as much, and sometimes they give a bump to comic book movies because they're popular and they want to get a lot of clicks. I'm not saying that's always true, but I'm saying that does go on. Letterboxd is a little bit more sort of laid back until it blows up. I think it's a pretty accurate reflection of what film aficionados are thinking about this in terms of the quality of the film. So Shazam has a 3.7 now on Letterboxd, which is pretty good. Black Panther sits at 3.8. Avengers Infinity War 4.0. So high. I love, like, I'm a film nerd, and Infinity War was amazing. I just have to say that. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's so high. I think film nerds really liked it. Wonder Woman had a 3.6. Suicide Squad had a 2.1. This is why I love it. Because if you talked to a DCEU fan and you said, lay this out to me, what's your score for Wonder Woman? It would be like 100 out of 100. It was amazing. And Suicide Squad would be like, oh, it's like an 80 out of 100. No. Suicide Squad was objectively a terrible movie. Don't give me that skewed fanboy bullshit. Like, it's not good. This is why I like Letterboxd, because they're very caustic and very guttural with their opinions. It's very straight to the point. Sorry, Letterboxd rant. Shazam doing well, high quality across the board. The nerds love it, the critics love it, and the fans love it. So you can't ask for anything better than that. That means high multiplier. Average movie is a 2.7x multiplier. That's its opening weekend to domestic total. 2.7x is usually what that multiplier is. This might push into the 3 territory, which is really good. Obviously projections were 40 to 50. We talked about that. It's beyond that. In terms of the audience for this, 25% was under 18, which I think is pretty common. I don't have my MPAA stats in front of me right now. 75% was over 25. Males were 66%, female 34%, very skewed male. Normal audience is about 53% male. This is at 66, so over-indexed on the male audience here. Parents and kids combined to rep 25% of the audience. They gave it 4.5 stars. That's the post-track rating, so very high there. Kids under 12 gave it a 72% recommend, which is also very high. General audiences only gave it a 61% recommend, so kids really like this movie. Demographics wise, in terms of who went to go see this, 53% white, normal, 17% Hispanic, a little bit lower than normal, really high Asian over index here, 13% versus the normal 7% of an audience is Asian, 11% African American, kind of in line with the normal movie going audience. And so this is an interesting, that's like, I just threw all those numbers at you. Let's like kind of like make sense of all of this. So it played well with the young folks. If we take a step back and look at this holistically, so DCEU, where is it right now? We had a really rough start. We had Man of Steel, which was not, I don't think, very good. You have the Snyder era of DCEU, which I think is a checkered sort of past. Batman versus Superman is one of the worst blockbusters I've ever seen put on film. It's absolutely terrible. I wonder what that Letterboxd score is. I'm gonna look that up. So it started out not great, and then that all sort of culminated. What's interesting is that Wonder Woman came out before the like dip down death spiral of Justice League. So you have a couple bad movies. They make a lot of money and make a big profit, but it was like spending a lot of money for a meal that like tastes okay, and then like an hour later you get sick. That's what those movies felt like. They just didn't feel like they were fantastic, and they weren't going to stand the test of time as great films. By the way, Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice has a 2.5 rating on Letterboxd, which is why I love Letterboxd, because it's right. So you had Wonder Woman, which was a huge win for DCU. They needed something like that to happen. It worked. It connected with people. It was right sort of during, I think it coincided with Me Too-ish, that sort of when that was taking off, that social movement in the United States. So it was like the right timing, made a ton of money, over $40 million domestically. Huge win for DCEU. They needed it so bad. Then you had Justice League come out, I think it was that November, which was a complete fucking disaster. I mean, like, so much worse than the worst projections. And it was the bad taste. It's taste aversion. When you go see Batman vs. Superman, you get super hyped. You go out to see it, and it's just like one of the worst films you've ever seen. I couldn't even get through it. I fell asleep to it multiple times. And then you have Justice League coming out. People just didn't want to do it again. They didn't want to sit through it again. They didn't want Zack Snyder's sort of universe, even though that movie was split between Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon. Snyder dropped out because of his daughter died. I think there's some other stuff involved too. I don't think they really wanted him to helm it anymore. And then Joss Whedon took over, and it was just still a mess. So you had that, and then you had Aquaman coming out. last last holiday season, actually. That was a huge wild card to huge question mark. Was it going to play like a Batman versus Superman or Justice League, or was it going to play like Wonder Woman? It played like Wonder Woman. It did fantastic. I was looking at the top box office profitable thing from Deadline, and I was just blown away by the numbers on Aquaman. It just did so well. And so it's on DCEU is now on the upswing. And like I kept hitting over and over again with that set of movies, is that if you in order to get to a cinematic universe, the level, and let's just say MCU is the top tier, the paradigm of the cinematic universe. It is, it always will be for the foreseeable future. It was a miracle, essentially what they did. So if DCEU wants to get to that, they have to build individual characters and then jump to the Justice League. You can't just throw in a Superman, a Batman, a Wonder Woman, a Flash, Cyborg, whoever. I'm not a comic book person. I have no idea who these people are, half of them. And just expect to have, a $700 million domestic movie happen. It's not. That doesn't work that way. You have to build these really interesting versions of these characters and then start doing ensemble stuff. And that's what they did with Wonder Woman. Now you have Aquaman. Now you have Shazam. I feel like Shazam is now added into that group. Maybe not like tier A, maybe like a tier B part of it, kind of like an Ant-Man situation with MCU, but I think Shazam can now be a part of that ensemble movie that will happen in the next 5 years probably. And so I think it's great for DCEU overall. It gives them another win, another notch in their belt. They're going to gain their confidence a little bit. And this one was not a sure bet either. Neither was Aquaman. Shazam coming out in like April. 3 weeks before the biggest movie ever is going to get released with your rival MCU. It was not a sure bet, and it's got a good 3 weeks of runway here. And the thing is too, it's also going to play counter to that huge massiveness of the new Avengers movie, right? It's Endgame. It's going to be smaller. It's going to be something where everything's not going to be sold out. I think it's going to have a really good run here. So DCEU has got to be happy about this. Warner Brothers has got to be stoked that Shazam, definitely more on the bet risk side, has paid off. Where's this thing going to go? So it's at $53 million this weekend, 56 overall. Let's start talking about where we think this movie's going to end up. With an A cinema score, you're looking at, I would say, minimum 2.8 multiplier would be a good guess. In terms of its breakdown domestically versus that would give it 2.8. Opening weekend was 50. I've created this new little calculator. I did this last night because I'm a nerd. This is what I do on Saturday nights. A new sort of calculator for projecting films. We'll see how it works out. It's just basically like putting what I say into a calculation or an algorithm. So like 2.8 multiplier at 53 opening weekend, you're looking at baseline 150-ish for a domestic total. In terms of how it's going to do overseas versus domestic, right now it's sitting at 35 to 65. Let's say I think that will stand. I don't know how well. Actually, it probably won't, because I've heard really negative things about this in China. There's all this buzz on the nerd forums about how terrible the audience scores were coming in on the Chinese social media movie tracking services. So let's say domestic percentage versus global box office. Normal film is about 40-ish%. We'll keep it there for now and just assume that's what it'll do. So you're looking at 150 domestic total, 371 global total. Now, that's good. Production budget was $100 million, so it's kind of at the point where it's definitely going to be profitable for Warner Brothers. Production budget $100 million bucks. And this is like, I'm sorry, I'm walking through the calculations. Mine probably not the most exciting listen right now, but I'm just going through this really quickly. And so what I'm doing is this: I'm taking the opening weekend and I'm multiplying that by its multiplier, which I'm going to assume is like a 2.8. Average movie's 2.7. This one, I feel like normally an A is about a 2.8 multiplier and on up. With this one, I don't think it's going to go towards the 2.93, just because it's kind of front loaded. It's kind of it's a comic book movie. They tend to be a little bit more heavy in the beginning, and the legs kind of fade faster than normal film. But I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt with a 2.8. And then, let's see where it ends up. I see a profit right now, and this is total ballpark. I just want to start this conversation about how it's doing, just to give you an idea. Right now, I'm seeing a pretty, 30, 40, $50 million profit on this. That's if it, ends up doing about 160 domestically and maybe 400, 420 globally. So this is a win. That's why I put together this calculation, because I always throw out these numbers and I always want to have something a little bit more specific to give you as a listener. So it's not just me saying, oh, I think it might do this. This is all based on Deadline's data that they've had back for the last 5 years. They do this profitability sort of tournament to sort of line up with March Madness. And so I take those numbers and sort of create different formulas about profitability and production budget to overall cost to release a film. And so it's fun. It's not like serious. It's not super accurate, but it gives us I think just a general idea of how well a film's going to do. So Shazam, I think at the end of the day is going to be profitable. It's going to make, I would say, probably around $50 million for Warner Brothers. I think they're going to be happy. But even more important than the financials of it are the fact that they have this another character now to build in that universe, which they can now use in other films, and they can eventually put in a big ensemble film for this. So yeah, awesome performance. We'll see where it goes drop wise. I would suspect it's going to have low drops because of that A cinema score and the general overall positivity with this film. Let's say it's going to be below 60, maybe 52%, I would say, for a drop, which would be very good for a movie like this. But Shazam, awesome performance, big win for Warner Brothers and DCEU. We'll keep track of that one as we move forward. That was number one at $53.4 million for the weekend. Let's see. On to the next movie. Pet Sematary, the 2019 remake of a 1989 film, which was a adaptation of a Stephen King novel, beloved novel, we would say. So Pet Sematary came in pretty much exactly where I thought it was going to. $25 million for the weekend. Per theater average was just about $7,000 per theater. It was a wide release, but didn't break the 4,000 theater mark. Production budget on this was $25 million, $21 million was the production budget, so not super massive. In terms of what people thought about this movie, critics gave it a 61% in Rotten Tomatoes, also a 61% as their actual score. Very rarely do those two align, but they did here. So not great. Barely fresh, I guess. I mean, is that fresh? I can never remember what fresh is. Yeah, so 60% is fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, but just by a smidge. Audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, grain of salt, 47%. But that does line up with the cinema score of a C+, which is not good. Now, little note, like I always say about cinema score in horror films, they're a little bit deflated than a normal film. I don't know why that is. I've always wondered why that is. I think audiences are a little bit tougher on horror films for some reason. There's a higher expectation there of being scared. There's a very specific reaction that audiences are looking for, and if they don't get it, they give it a low score. And I think that's what happened here with Pet Sematary. I don't think it was as scary as they thought it was going to be or wanted it to be, and there weren't enough sort of jump scares, is what I've heard, just anecdotally. Letterboxd score 2.8. Oh, actually, let's go back a little bit. So the original Pet Sematary movie, which came out in 1989, got a B at Cinema Score. That's the one thing that's fantastic about Cinema Score is that it goes back for 40 years. So we have 40 years of movie scores, pretty much the same process too that they've always been doing. It's a very consistent data set to compare. So definitely worse than the original, which came in at a B Cinema Score. This one was a C+. Letterboxd score 2.8 out of 5. The original got a 3.2. Obviously, that's people going back and watching it. It got a 3.6, the 2017 version. Us got a 3.9. Happy Death Day to You got a 3.1. So lower than all of those. Obviously, it wasn't going to hit the It or Us mark because those are very highly regarded horror films. Happy Death Day to You, I don't think was very highly regarded at all got a 3.1, and this is below that. Now, this is just the start. This is its opening weekend. People are going out to see it. But the film nerds do not like this movie, which is not a good sign. Which means it probably won't have any sort of like long legs. It won't have any sort of cult classic sort of aura to it. So this thing might just sort of die on the vine. In terms of its opening, Deadline had some good comps here. Happy Death Day, the original, did 26 million. Evil Dead Remake did 25.7. Don't Breathe back in 2016 did 26.4 million. So it's right in that wheelhouse, which is why I sort of guessed that. Like, bigger horror film. This one has a glossiness to it. Kind of mid-20s is usually what I feel like for those films. Some more exit scores from Deadline. They took these from PostTrack. 2.5 stars on PostTrack. Low 47% definite recommend. So again, a lot of numbers at you. I like to throw those out to give you some context. Overall, people hate this movie. It's not good. That's really what it comes down to. That's really bad for a couple of reasons. One main reason. Horror films have low multipliers in general. If the average film is a 2.7, they're more in the 2.5, 2.4 range. They're just not high. Deadline points out that a good comp for this would be the Evil Dead remake in 2013, which opened very similarly at 25. That had a 2.1x multiplier. So this movie is going probably to tailspin. And that's because, one, it's a horror film. They're already front-loaded. Two, it's poor quality. And so that's a combination you don't want. So let's take a look at where we think that one's going to end up. Does this have any international audience is what I really want to know. I don't know if it's opened up yet. It's in 17 million foreign, so 42.3 overall. Not fantastic. So what's interesting about this one is this opening's not bad. It's not a bad opening. It's not like a flop opening. What I would be concerned about if I was Paramount is this thing is like taking the yoke and just pushing it straight down. This is not going to last long. It will be completely decimated by the time Endgame comes out in a few weeks. So they need to make all of their money in the next 2 weeks or so. So at $25 million opening, let's walk through it. Multiplier 2.1 was the Evil Dead multiplier. Let's give this a benefit of the doubt and say 2.2. Not very high, very low, but kind of in line with the quality of the film and the fact that it's a horror movie. Opening weekend here, we did 25. Its domestic to global take is probably going to be on the higher side. If the average film was 40% domestic, this is probably going to be 45 to 50. Let's just say 50. Production budget was pretty low at 21, so that's going to help it a lot. And then I put it at kind of like the break-even point is where I see it right now, but I'm running the numbers real time here. I think like $55 million total domestic, 110-ish total global, but I think that could shift. It could go higher. It's not going to go any higher domestic. The global is kind of the foreign markets are the big gray area right now. I just don't know how well it's going to do in like Russia or like China. I don't think it can open in China because it has ghosts in it or something. Like they have a rule against ghosts. It's a very strict process to get a film into China. I don't think this one's going to do it. I don't think. So I think the other thing is it's kind of a middling performance. It didn't break out. What's funny though is this: if I had just seen the $25 million this weekend, I'd be like, oh man, that's great. What a great performance for a smaller horror film. It's definitely going to make money. Everyone's going to be happy. But when you throw in the negative scores here from people and just sort of from what I've heard from people anecdotally on Twitter and all the box office forums, people don't like this movie, especially horror film fans. So the 25 normally would get you $75 million domestically if it was a good film. It's going to struggle to get to 50 is what it sounds like. And so I think it's more of a break-even push territory for Pet Sematary. Not necessarily a flop at all. I don't think it's going to lose a lot of money. I just don't think it's going to make a lot of money either. Which is too bad. You look at the glossy horror movies. It's one of my sort of like, I don't know, specialties, expertise. I don't know, my amateur expertise. It's one of my interests is looking at horror films and how they do overall, especially the last few years. This one kind of fits into that model that it is really the paradigm for right now. Is a very glossy remake, that try to engage as the general audience. This one is not necessarily made for horror movie fans. It's made for the general audience. That's why you have a production budget that's higher than a Blumhouse. $21 million doesn't sound like a lot to make a movie. Like Shazam, which is a smaller comic book movie, was $100 million. But $21 million for a horror film is kind of on the higher side because Blumhouse caps theirs out at $4 to $5 million, almost like micro budgets. So it's part of this movement to make glossier horror films, which definitely it may be the paradigm, but it kind of started back with The Conjuring. And maybe you could say it started back with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake in 2003. So it's part of that sort of pedigree and that sort of that vibe that major studios are trying to remake these movies. Get a story that you probably know or have heard of. Think about younger people in this one. Like, they've probably never seen Pet Sematary, the movie. They've probably never read the book, but they've heard of it and know of it. So you have this sort of established IP and awareness, and you try to milk it a bit. And, that we had problems with this. Like, Poltergeist was a recent one that they did. Also had a C+ cinema score. Disaster, that had like a 1.9 multiplier, I think. I'm making that up, but it's probably close to that. So, we're going to be in this glut of horror films now. And I've talked about this for like 2 years, ever since it came out. Well, a year and a half ago, whatever. We have Us, Pet Sematary, Curse of La Llorona is coming out. Was that next week, baby? I think it is next, or maybe 2 weeks. It's there. It's raining horror films now, and this is sort of like just kind of an average performance here. Now the problem is if these start adding up, if we start having 5, 6, 10 of these movies come out a year and none of them break out, then the studios are going to start turning off the faucet a bit. Be like, all right, we tried making the glitzy, glossy horror films and sell them to a general audience instead of like the film or horror nerds. We're not going to do that anymore. So like Pet Sematary is kind of, at the end of the day, it's an okay performance. But it kind of like, I think more than anything, it makes a company like Paramount or Warner Brothers think twice about dumping money into something like this, because it wasn't just the $21 million obviously they spent on the production budget. It was the marketing budget that really was the big cost here. Domestically, to put out a film and market it in the US and Canada, you're looking at a marketing budget of like $50 million easily. For a movie like this, might be smaller, might be focused on social media, but that's a lot of money. And they want to profit every single time. They want to profit. And with Pet Sematary, I just think they're going to get a massive profit. But we'll watch to see where that goes. Expect a massive drop on that. I'm calling it now, 60% drop, which is kind of outrageous, but it's going to drop 60%. I almost bet you $1 million it will. It just has all the elements: the horror film, the low cinema score, horror films, horror nerds don't like it. It's just not going to go anywhere. And it's not super scary. So I would say at least 60. Let's call it 61% drop. I'm going to throw it out there. I'm calling my shot. 61% drop for Pet Sematary. Speaking of terrible drops, Dumbo in its second weekend did 18.2 million, a 60% drop. Now, if you don't follow the show and you don't follow the box office, you're going to be like, oh, who cares? Like, is that a big deal? So here's the story. For a family film like this, especially Disney, a drop anything over 45% on its second weekend is high. This is an outrageously high drop for a movie like this, like absurdly high. This is a horror movie drop. And somebody actually said that on Deadline, one of the studio execs. He's like, yeah, nice horror movie drop on this. This is awful. And so now from last week, the story has changed on this. Last week, I was like, nah, it's not a great performance. Disney hasn't had a lot of wins in the last year. They got high off the Beauty and the Beast stuff, and obviously the Avengers and MCU prints money for them, so it's like, what does it matter? But a lot of these sort of Christopher Robin, Dumbo, Wrinkle in Time, that Nutcracker movie that came out, they have not done well. Now this has shifted towards disaster territory. I don't even know what I called this last week. Was it like maybe a flop? I don't know if I called it. It's definitely a flop. Now it's into like lose lots of money. $170 million production budget. This thing is going to struggle to make any money here domestically. Internationally, let's see where it's at internationally. Maybe the global audience will save this. It's at 213 worldwide. This thing is going to struggle. So like just back of the math, back of the math. Back of the napkin math. 170 production budget. Total cost for this probably going to be $500 million to produce, release it worldwide on all platforms, all the way through TV. It needs to make a lot of money to profit. That global box office that it needs to make, I would say, just based on numbers that I've gotten from Deadline, probably $600 million worldwide. That's not going to happen. It's not going to come close. So now I think at this point, Disney is they're probably shifting their focus to, wow, this is a huge fuck up. We're not going to ever hire Tim Burton again, probably. This is they have to mitigate the losses now. They want to, like, you know, instead of it being a $200 million or $150 million loss, they want it to be a $100 million loss. So maybe they can get down to 50. That's what I think probably their strategy is now. But Dumbo's officially a flop now. Not, you know, I feel bad for Tim Burton. You know, I loved his earlier stuff in his career. He's gotten really, I don't know what you would call blasé or something. His films have just not, he needs to make another Edward Scissorhands. I mean, the Dumbo stuff and the family stuff, it just doesn't really connect with him. He's a lot darker than that. And that mixture of the dark fantasy stuff and Disney, it just doesn't, and you kind of saw that in the Dumbo trailers. It was like, it's almost like Tim Burton is like really pulling his punches. And I don't want him to. Because I think he's a wonderful artist and great director. And he has such a unique vision and voice that he's doing stuff like Dumbo. It just obviously doesn't work. It doesn't work for critics, really. And it doesn't really work for audiences. And so that's that. You know, Dumbo's officially a flop now. And we'll keep tracking that one. If it keeps dropping like that, it could be $150 million loss, I would say. We'll see what Deadline the Insiders say on that. But horrible performance, horrible second weekend for Dumbo. Number 4 was Us, $13.8 million, 58% drop. That was also super high. Why is that dropping so high? You know, it's a horror film. What did it do last weekend? This one, I had not looked at this number yet, so it's really surprising me just off the jump. So last weekend, 53% drop, which is really good for a horror film on its second weekend. But that's not good that it's dropping 58%. Usually your biggest drop is going to be first to second weekend. Horror film, like I was saying before, well over 55% usually, maybe up into 60%, low 60s, and on higher for like Freddy vs. Jason, like 70% or something. Us doing 50% drop on its third weekend, not great. Something's not connecting here. It's not going to have the legs at all of Get Out. Like Get Out at 5x multiplier. It was in a magical run. This is going to be nowhere near that. Why? That's a big question I have right now. Domestically, we're speaking now. Like, why is this not necessarily having the staying power that I thought it was going to? And maybe I'm probably overreacting to one weekend's drop. It's possible. But it's tough competition. I guess Pet Sematary probably hurt it as another horror film. So all the horror film fans, instead of seeing Us a second time to go to the movies, like, let's go see Pet Sematary, something new. People always want something new. Maybe Shazam took some of that audience away. I'll keep my eye on it, but it's sitting at 152 now, domestically, in its third weekend. And so I say all that bullshit, right? It has a $20 million production budget. It's going to like make a ton of money. So like the whole drop thing is a very myopic viewpoint. It is interesting to me as someone who follows the box office that it's, you know, its legs are kind of weakening, but its overall performance is fantastic. $152 million in its third weekend. It's just like, I don't know how much money it's going to make Universal and Blumhouse, but well over $15 million in profit, probably up to $100 million, maybe more. We'll see what Deadline says next year when the final numbers come in. But it's a big win. Just kind of weakening a bit here in its third weekend. Captain Marvel in its fifth weekend is number 5. $12.6 million, 38% drop. Now that is a drop you want in your fifth weekend for a superhero movie. This one is just, it's playing strong. It's got these strong marathon legs. It's losing theaters, 412 theaters it lost this weekend. Still strong per theater average, $3,500 in its fifth weekend. Total take so far for Captain Marvel, $374 million. It also had a big milestone this week. It broke the $1 billion mark global. What more can I say about Captain Marvel? It's marvelous. I don't fucking know. Like it's a really good performance, and I think, you know, as someone who's followed MCU and DCU very closely over the last few years, this one is both surprising and not surprising at all. It's surprising to me because there was a lot of, it felt like there was a lot of risk here with a new character and bringing in Brie Larson, who is known as like a very, I think more of an arty actress than sort of like a huge blockbuster star. And so there was some inherent risk in what they were doing, but they have the formula down so well that they can get people to show up and they can market it the right way. The final product speaks for itself. People really enjoy the film. They love to go see it, sometimes multiple times. It also sort of, it's very female empowering as well. That helps with the, the ticket sales and stuff like that. So, this is, that's why it's surprising. It's not surprising at all because MCU has proven over and over again, Marvel and Disney, that they know how to do this better than anybody else in the game, by far. We talk about DCEU. They're not even within a country mile of what MCU is able to do right now. They have figured out the box office formula, and there should be books written about this. There'll be PhD dissertations probably written about this. Just not even just focusing on the movies, but focusing on business at large. I mean, this is a phenomenon at this point. And where's it going to go after Endgame when it comes out in a few weeks? I think that's one of the reasons why the drops are so low. Is people are just getting hyped for Endgame, is they want to see they want to see Captain Marvel and see someone who's going to be a part of it. It's all part of that holistic experience, which is why cinematic universes can be so lucrative, is that the films sort of feed off of each other and create this sort of self-reflexive feedback loop. Almost becomes like a feeding frenzy. And so that's why it's doing so well. That's why the drops are low. We'll see where it goes, but I think, it's over $1 billion. It's going to be in the top 10 most profitable films yet next year when the Deadline comes out with their list, without a doubt. Big question domestically, is it going to make $400 million? Absolutely at this point. That was a little bit of a question mark week 1, week 2. There's no question right now it's going to make $400 million domestically. I mean, maybe it can be Wonder Woman. It's possible at this point. So just wonderful performance overall for Captain Marvel and its 5th weekend. Number 6, we do have a new release here. Best of Enemies from SDX, 4.5 million in 1,700 theaters. So kind of like a mid-tier wide release. Per theater average is not very strong, $2,600. This one I didn't think was going to do very well. Some numbers for it: 52% Rotten Tomatoes from critics, 6 out of 10, 60% score, actual score. Audience score is a 73% on Rotten Tomatoes, grain of salt. Cinema score was an A. Letterboxd was 3.1 compared to Green Book, which had a 3.86. Black Klansman, 3.9. I chose those films because it's white versus African-American racial dynamics in America. So not nearly as good as those movies in terms of this Letterboxd score. But here's one silver lining here for, I think, Best of Enemies from SDX. SDX needs more wins like this. They need smaller films to do well. I believe the cinema score from women over 35 on this was an A+. Overall A cinema score. 82% on post-track. Those are all very strong numbers, but that A+ stands out to me because if you want your film to do well, especially have long legs, have a high multiplier, women over 35 is a key demographic for that. Just because they go to the movies multiple, it's just, there's something about that group of people that will go the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th weekend in a group of people. And so if word of mouth spreads among women over 35 in the US and Canada, this could have a little 2nd, 3rd wind going for it. I think that might happen. We also have the Easter holiday coming up. Not that this is an Easter film, but it's kind of like an adult drama that those tend to do better around Easter. So I do think, despite the fact that it opened very low at 4.5, per theater average was not great. I have to watch myself now because I wrote off Green Book way too early. Way too early. So I'm not going to write this one off. I think it's going to have an okay performance. The multiplier is going to be at least 3x. There's no doubt in my mind. So you're looking at, $13 million, at least domestically. Internationally, the Caucasian, white, African-American racial dynamic doesn't necessarily play all that well overseas. Here, because we all have a history with it and an understanding, a cultural understanding of it here, there's like a cultural shorthand to that relationship that doesn't exist other places. And so that's why those movies tend to not have a big foreign market. So it's not going to have, it's not going to make like $50 million somewhere else probably. The only exception to that was Green Book, which was co-financed by the Chinese, and they basically propped it up as like, hey, this is part of the Chinese film industry, and so a lot of people in China did see it. But that's kind of like an outlier. Best Enemies, best case scenario, probably what, $15 million domestically, maybe 20. If that older group of people does end up going to see it and sort of spreading the word, maybe it does $20 million. Maybe it gets to like a 5x multiplier. It's possible. Overall, though, not a fantastic performance. Everybody sort of saw this coming as being on more of a floppage, not doing all that well side. But I think, if production budget was $10 million, it's STX, you're releasing it in April. Why you're not releasing it during award season? Oh, it's not fantastic. So it was kind of in no man's land. Like, it's not good enough for awards contention. You can't release it in the summer or fall more leading up towards the Oscars. So it's kind of a best case scenario for Best of Enemies right now, especially if those legs kick in. I'm going to call it like an okay performance. So that was number 6. Number 7 was 5 Feet Apart. 3.7, great 40% drop. Now sits at $41.5 million overall. A decent performance for that film, I would say. Lionsgate, I think, is pretty happy with that. Number 8 was Unplanned, $3.2 million. 49% drop, sitting at $2,100 per theater average right now. Overall, $12.5 million for Unplanned. That's the Pure Flix propaganda anti-abortion film. Built-in audience, though, you got to say that. I think they gave it an A+ on CinemaScore. It's so ridiculous. It's like, I knew it was going to get like an A+ because with these movies, it's basically regurgitating what people want to. It's like reaffirming their dogmatic ideology, and they just love to revel in that for some reason. It's like, oh yeah, see, this movie's great, see, abortion should be illegal. I'm like, no. But for that group of people, I guess they really like that, and like they like to hear that message, and so they love it. Overall performance, $12.5 million on a $6 million budget. Probably not a lot of marketing costs because you just say, send it out to evangelicals and they'll love this thing. I mean, easily social media campaign. You do PR and marketing through churches. So I think the marketing budget was probably super low. Is it going to make money? I'm not really sure. It's hard to really tell for something with a movie like that. That was 8. Number 9 was Wonder Park, $2 million, 59% drop. Terrible on its 4th weekend. It sits at $41.9 million. Worst per theater average in the top 10 at just about $900 per theater. This is going to lose a ton of money. People are arguing what's going to lose more, Dumbo or Wonder Park. I think that was on Reddit. I feel like Wonder Park might. I don't know. It cost $100 million to make. I think it's doing so poorly, and like you just cannot. The thing about Dumbo is it's going to lose money. But because of the Disney name and because of their worldwide marketing reach, they can get people to go out and see it to some degree. Something like Wonder Park, good luck. Like, nobody knows what it is. And so it's just not going to have, much legs to stand on at all. So I think it's probably going to be Wonder Park, maybe $100 million loss, 150. Something like that, something massive. Number 10 was How to Train Your Dragon, still sticking around at 7th weekend, 1.9 million, 55% drop. Lost about 900 theaters this weekend. Per theater average, still just above $1,000 per theater. Total take so far for How to Train Your Dragon, 156. We'll see how long Universal puts that one to bed. I think they bring that back in about 4 to 5 years, that whole series. Okay, that is the top 10. Some deeper dives, obviously, in Shazam, Pet Sematary, and Best of Enemies. Calling it right now, Shazam's a win. Pet Sematary is a push. Best of Enemies is kind of a push to a loss-ish for STX. But, best case scenario for what that movie was when it was getting released. The other big story is Dumbo is now officially a flop. Captain Marvel's having wonderful drops, really great performance. Us having kind of a steeper drop on its third weekend, but like in the thought process of me saying that, it's like, what does it matter? It's made $152 million domestically. It's going to print money. And that's sort of like the headlines from the top 10. Anything outside the top 10 to talk about? Beach Bum's doing nothing, of course, sitting at $3 million. Called that. That was never going to make a cash. Hotel Mumbai, not really doing much. In almost 1,000 theaters, $6.3 million so far on that. I think Bleecker Street kind of blew the marketing on that and distribution of that. What else? The Public. I don't know what the Greenwich Films. I don't know anything about this movie. Terrible performance. I mean, unbelievable. Emilio Estevez, director and writer. What? Alec Baldwin's in this? This has got cult classic terrible film written all over it, or maybe just boring fall asleep film. That's going nowhere. That's terrible. 265 theaters it opened in, couldn't even push $1,000 per theater. That's horrific. One kind of higher profile art film, High Life, from A24, did the typical 4-theater launch, New York and Los Angeles. I can, at least the Angelica in New York and ArcLight in Los Angeles, I can almost bet you $1 million it was going to be in. That's just how the circuit works. It's like very specific theaters. 25K per theater, it's not going to break out. You need to push 50K, 60K on up to break out of the cosmopolitan New York and Los Angeles crowds, and it's not going to happen. It's too bad. I think it's probably a really interesting film. It seems like it, but I don't think it's not going to go anywhere, unfortunately, for them. Okay, so that's the top 10 plus some highlights outside the top 20. Let's talk a little bit about what's coming up in the next few weeks and close out the show. A big weekend here. The after is not big. Hellboy comes out again. Am I just not the demo for this? I can't find a trailer. I've never been. I've never been served a trailer or anything. No social media ads on this. Nothing. So I have no idea how that's going to open. I don't know, 25, 20, maybe lower. It seems like it's going to be a disaster. Little Comedy opens up. I think that one's going to do pretty well. $20 million production budget, but I feel like PG-13. I get the feeling that Little's going to do pretty well, especially with the Easter holiday coming up. I'd say probably opens at like 17 to 23 and has a pretty good multiplier, plays strong through the end of April. Missing Link from United Arts releasing. Oh yeah, we talked about this one. Some weird animated film. I don't know, maybe like $4 million. No one's going to see that. Why would you put out an animated film if you weren't a major studio? That doesn't make any sense to me anymore. Like maybe there's going to be an independent animation hit soon, but I just don't see it happening. After from Aviron. That's how I say it. I don't give a shit anymore. This one's good. This is like a sexy thriller from like 1995 is what it looks like. No one's gonna see that. Although they are putting out in 2,000 theaters. Also, Missing Link is going out in 3,500 theaters. Why are you dumping money in releasing these films? Why? When you know they're not gonna do well. Maybe it's contractual stuff. Also coming out of interest to film nerds is Mary Magdalene. The movie that was shot like 2 years ago with Joaquin Phoenix and Rooney Mara as Mary, of course. It got released last year, I want to say in the UK or something. It sits at $11 million worldwide. It got released worldwide. It got released in like 50 countries. Let's see what the biggest country was. Germany did okay, 1.2, 1.6 in Italy, $1 million in the UK and $1 million in Spain. So, big in the Catholic countries, I guess. This is going to do nothing. Like, I don't know why IFC's even putting this out. That's got to be contractual, too. Putting out in 50 theaters, no one's going to see this. Like, literally nobody. It's like, why would you make an art film for a group of people that, for the most part, doesn't like art films? Like, the group of people that would see this, I feel is, like, kind of tangentially related to the unplanned evangelical audience. Now, it's Catholic. It's a little bit different in America. There's not a ton of crossover necessarily, but they kind of like this similar type films and messages. Mary Magdalene with Rooney Mara and Joaquin Phoenix, both what I would call pretty arty actors in general, who seem hyper progressive and borderline leftists. How does that add up? Like, I just don't get it. And like, do you think art movie people are going to go out and see Mary Magdalene? No, they're like, I don't go to church. Why would I go to church at the movie theater? Like, I don't get the whole. We're talking about the like post-mortem. It's already failed. Product conception, terrible idea. Okay, so that's next week, and then the week after, the pre-Endgame week. I think it's pre-Endgame. Yeah, Avengers Endgame comes out on the 26th. Curse of La Llorona. which is part of the Conjuring universe, which I thought was pretty cool. That got promoted in South by Southwest, that it is part of it. Also coming out randomly is Under the Silver Lake from A24. A24 has had a really weird past couple of weeks. They're getting into this. I'm really deep in film Twitter now. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just bored. I love the conversations that people have. But one of the things that's coming up about A24, it's like the only people that talk about A24 too, is that they have basically like suffocated this release, Under the Silver Lake, because apparently it's so terrible. Mark Kermode's video rant on this, BBC movie critic is hilarious. Go look up Under the Silver Lake review, Mark Kermode, Kermode, and you'll have a good laugh for about 5 minutes. He just rips this film apart. But people are bringing up like A24 is supposed to be this, peak of artistic freedom and indie distribution and like unique voices, and yet like when a film Under the Silver Lake goes for it and fails, they bury it. And they also talked about them burying Native Son on HBO this weekend and not really promoting it. I don't know if there's anything behind that stuff. I love A24. I think what they're doing is fantastic. They're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But I kind of see a little bit of a point there. Like, you would think with Under the Silver Lake, you would just, in my mind, push it out as much as possible. It may be a shit show, but a shit show is going to get you PR and press, especially among the nerds. Like, because it's already a thing. Like, Under the Silver Lake is already like a meme among arty film nerd people. Like, whether you like it or not, you have to see it. You just have to see it to like have an opinion on it. And you would think A24 would sort of catapult or ride that wave of just conversation that was happening, and they're not. They're just like throwing it out there. That's gonna get released in theaters, and then I think it's gonna be on VOD the same day. So stupid. I gotta watch it. And then we get to Endgame, and then we get into May. But should be an exciting few weeks here. Normally before a massive movie like a Star Wars and Avengers movie, it's kind of like before a big wave comes, the water just like flows off the beach and it's like barren and dry. That's not happening. There's tons of movies coming out next week, and then La Llorona is going to be pretty big on the 19th. So it's not going to be like, it's going to be a pretty exciting couple of weeks, and then we get to Endgame. I've got to do an Endgame MCU show. I'm committing to it. I will do an MCU show the week before Avengers Endgame comes out. In any event, thanks for listening, guys. This has been the Wildline Podcast. Take care.